Good evening, everybody. My name is Stuart Hallers. I'm an Associate Director at Black Swan State Theatre Company, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you this evening to the Heath Ledger Theatre at the State Theatre Centre for the subscriber briefing for our new production of Ben Elton's play GASP, directed by Wesley Enoch. I would just like to take this moment, there's a few people who I've only met today actually, so perhaps I'll ask the Artistic Director of Queensland Theatre Company and Director of the production, Wesley Enoch, to pass the mic along and everyone can introduce themselves, or perhaps, Wesley, would you like to introduce everyone?
I thought you were going to make me do it another way. I'm Wesley Enoch. I'm the Director of GASP and the Artistic Director of the Queensland Theatre Company.
I'm Trent Sudgeist, the lighting designer.
Hello, I'm Dan Evans and I'm a Directorial Associate, so I assist Wesley Enoch.
Hello, my name's Stephen Rook. I'm playing Sandy.
Hello, my name's Caroline Brazier. I'm playing Kirsten.
G'day, I'm Greg McNeil. I'm playing the Chief.
I'm Christina Smith. I'm set and costume designer.
Hello, I'm Lucy Golby. I'm playing Peggy.
Hi, I'm Craig Wilkinson and I'm the projection designer.
Hello, I'm Damon and I play Philip and I'm a Pisces.
And welcome to this evening's Theatre Anonymous. As I walk back across the stage to pass the microphone back to Wesley, because I'll throw to you in a moment, I was fortunate enough to see a run this afternoon of this rollicking new adaptation of the play that Ben Elton originally wrote several years ago called Gasping, and this is a reimagining, a reinvention and a reinterpretation of the play for an Australian audience, and specifically looking at the society that we're in today. Wesley, would you like to just give us a brief rundown of the play and its genesis?
Well, Ben, if he was here, would tell the story, but this is the first play he ever wrote in 1990, I think it was, 24 years ago. He wrote it as a young man, and it was about the commodification of air, about selling air like we now look at, water, I guess. The whole idea of bottling up something that we take for granted and making it into a commodity and selling it off. And I know Kate Cherry, because Ben now lives in Fremantle, which I'm sure many of you will know, and that Kate and Ben had been talking about, well, what's a good show to be doing and what can we do together? And they came upon this idea of updating Gasping to create the play Gasp, and to it also for it to be a commentary on how the resources sector was booming and how it was all going. And actually, this was a conversation that was, a year ago, 18 months ago, and so now everyone's a bit shaky about the resource sectors, but at the time everyone was very confident about selling out the commodities, and once that was done, once the mining boom was over, what would they sell? What would be the next commodity? And that's where air comes from. And the chief, which Greg plays, is basically the head of a huge Lockhart Resources. He's the chief of that. Now, is he Clive Palmer? Is he Twiggy Forrest? Is he Gina Reinhardt? Is he? But the whole idea of being the head of a big resources company, and Sandy, which Stephen plays, and Philip, which Damon plays, they're two characters, two people who are on the make, trying to find what the next resource is. Kirsten, who Caroline plays, is a marketing guru. She runs a company called Image Control, and she's like all marketing gurus. The way she gets by is putting full-page ads in The Australian, and then so she's there as almost as kind of pushing in the same direction. And this character Peggy, which Lucy plays, is a new character. Didn't exist in the original play, and Ben was talking about this heartstring, this idea of what motivates the heart of the play, and he wrote this character Peggy, a character who, if you like, is Philip's love interest and wants to do well by the world. She has respiratory problems, she has asthma and hay fever and all the other things, and this whole idea of cleaning the air and commodifying the air will help her out. And then we find that there are moral dilemmas as we go along, as it becomes more and more commodified. People start to make stockpiles of air, and then you can't walk the streets because there's not enough air and all that stuff. And it goes to a very comic extreme. It's a very kind of big play, but through that comic extreme, we get to understand the little bits of detail. So Ben's been rewriting and getting new drafts all the time, and and almost like do some rewriting before the opening night next week as well, because it's treating it like a new work in so many ways. Poor actors, they keep learning so many different versions of things. See the little wry smile that kind of rippled along there? That's where that comes from. But there's always changes, and so listening to it as well.
Thanks for that. And in true Ben Elfman style, it is hilarious. It's really, really funny. And one of the elements of that comic genius is making you laugh at something whilst also making you, urging you to think about it and question the moral dilemmas and ethics behind these characters' decisions. This play, I should mention, is a co-production between Black Swan and Queensland Theatre Company. We rehearsed over in Brisbane, and this cast have literally just flown in on the weekend to open the show here in Perth. So behind our cast and creatives, you can see the set in the beginning stages of its bump into the theatre. With respect to that, I'd just like to throw to you, Christina, perhaps you'd like to talk us through some of the design elements that you and Wesley talked about when approaching this play.
Certainly. Although, as you can see at the moment, there isn't that much to see. Being the first day of bump in, we actually have to get all our overhead elements done first. As many of you know, if you've seen my stuff with Black Swan before, I do love a ceiling piece. So there is some ceiling in this set again, so therefore we actually have to get sort of everything up and in the air before we can bump in the rest of the set. So tomorrow and this evening we'll be fairly frantic to get the rest in. When Wesley and I talked about the world of GASP, we talked about it being set either in a very near future or in almost an alternative reality, almost imagining what might happen in a world maybe where the big Wall Street crash didn't happen. You know, it's a world that is possibly more driven by want and greed and marketing than our world is now. So it should be a very familiar world to us, but also it is a heightened world, and a world where we can actually have this sort of comedy can exist in this heightened place. It's Trent, the line designer, actually put his worded it beautifully when we were designing it. He talked about this world being a hermetically sealed environment. So in a way that all of this trading of air and the commodity of air almost doesn't affect the people in this world. It's a very clean and corporate white space. There's so many different scenes, so it's a space that can actually change with the help of projection, which we'll talk about, no doubt, can change in amongst all the different environments that we've got, various office environments or corporate environments. Peggy's world in there is quite different, as Wes touched on, her being the sort of the heartstring of the production. So within this very clinical environment, her world has actually got a very, I guess what you'd call nowadays a very vintage feel. You know, her house is full of pre-loved items that might have been bought from second hand. The textures are very natural, they're very real. So she is a very sort of grounded base, a very real world sort of base, in amongst all of this sort of high shine and gloss and corporate imagery, I guess.
Great, thanks for that. Was there anything else you wanted to add? Sorry, I thought...
Not really.
Okay. As Christina said, it's there's not much behind us at the moment, but obviously when you come to the show you'll see a whole lot more. Are there any questions from the audience that immediately spring to mind for our creatives, designers or cast? Yes?
Just wondering, this is quite a new piece or brand new. How would you kind of approach it artistically as opposed to something that's quite old or something like a Shakespeare or it was a Chekhov play?
Well,
Sorry, I'll just repeat the question so that everyone can hear that. Being a new production, how do we approach it from a design perspective compared to a classic, a play that's extant, that's been produced before by many other people over the years? Christina?
Well, for me, actually, not much differently. To be honest, like I would approach most plays in the same way. That it is a very, it's always a very clean slate. I try not to look at or think about what's been done before. That being said, probably the biggest difference design-wise I find with a new piece is that it is going to change. You know it's going to change. Often if you've had a text which has had several productions before, for various reasons it's not that malleable, it doesn't change much, whether that be the copyright behind it or the fact that they've got it to a stage where it's really working. When I'm doing a new piece, I'm anticipating that maybe scenes might be very different from when we first talk about the design, as to when it actually might open. Characters might change significantly. So often in a new piece, I always work a lot with the actors to try and make sure that you're creating characters, that you're on the same sort of track. But in a new piece, I find that I often have to actually rely a lot more on what's happening in the room because things change actually beyond the floor. Scenes might be reordered, all sorts of fun and games can happen. So usually I'm, just very accepting of it and being on my toes and making sure I can keep up with what's happening in the room.
Great, thanks for that. Any other questions? Yes?
Combining the two different theatre companies, were there any challenges with alignment on how you interpret the play?
Any challenges on the alignment of bringing together two state theatre companies interpreting a play? That's an interesting question, particularly given the various sponsors and donors and major partners that the two companies have. Wesley, perhaps you'd like to have a go at answering that for us?
Love to. Thank you. It's interesting because the nature of satire is that it's got to hurt a little bit. The bite of satire is that it's got to be close enough to actually go, ooh, that's a bit of a bristle. It's interesting, one of the conversations, Greg was in fact the last person cast. You were cast like a week before rehearsal started, was that right, Greg?
Yeah, that was a bit of a shock. I was in relaxed anticipation. I knew I was on the cards to perhaps get a role, and you're kind of waiting, and then you give up and forget, and then you go, yeah, okay, and then next thing you know, you're on a plane and you're in somewhere else and you're into it. So,
well, that was mostly because we were trying to go, are we going to do an impersonation of a character? Or are we going to do just a generic kind of it doesn't really matter kind of. So there was a point where we were saying, oh, actually we're looking at a Clive Palmer type person. At one point we were even talking about a fat suit, we were talking about white wig, we were doing the whole thing. And there was a whole conversation back and forth, and Kate and I were talking about what does that mean, what are the kind of repercussions of that, is that important, is it not important? In fact, I talked to the Premier of Queensland, and he said, because he and Clive Palmer are notoriously not good friends. He said, doesn't worry me, go for it. Like this was the kind of advice. But it's great. The thing of we've done a number of co-productions together. You'd know them, I guess, between Queensland Theatre Company and Black Swan. We're kind of very closely aligned. And so Kate and I go back 20-odd years, 25 years. We studied together in America for a short time and all that stuff. So we've got to respond, we go back and forward, and sometimes you can have quite heated arguments or discussions with people you love. And so we go, oh, what about, no, we can't do that. What about this? Back and forward. And it's in that negotiation that theatre's made. It's not always done kind of, anyone who's been involved in business knows that. It's not always friendly, it's not always kind of, but at the end of the day, you get through it and you get to make sure that the show's the best it can be. And sometimes through that kind of crucible of argy-bargy back and forward, that you come up with something that's a real gem. And I think that's what we've got here.
It's no place for the faint-hearted, it's a passionate industry, and I guess if you're not passionate about it, you would never get involved.
That's right, and hence its place in our society to hold the mirror, as it were, up to nature and question everything that we do and who we are. Any other questions?
Put them off.
No? Get us all thinking about the process. Is there anyone in the cast who would like to talk about their approach to the work, to the character?
Caroline, come on. Caroline,
I'd like to say a few. Not really.
Yeah, go.
Only just to follow up on the question, how do you approach a new work? Well, it's not really a new work, it's reworking of a work that's some 25 years old or something. In terms of the acting process, I'll just speak very briefly on how that is for me. But I think that whenever you're given a character in a play, wherever it's set or however old or young the play is. Your brief is pretty much the same thing, is to work out why these people are doing what they're doing, what do they want, how do they feel about everybody else in the room, and how they're going to go about getting what they want. And so that's our job. And it's regardless of whether you're doing Shakespeare or Chekhov or this or, you know, anything. And so that's what we're tasked with, is to find out why these characters are larger than life, and so our job is to make them believable human beings who are also funny and ridiculous. Very well dressed in my case. But yeah, to tell you a story that you can laugh at and believe in.
In fact, that's kind of what this afternoon we did a run, and one of the big learnings from that too, like the conversation was about, how does the style of the satire and the comedy, how does that balance with the kind of the heart and that was, it's difficult because you're constantly in this kind of seesaw of which one's the right thing to get. Will this get the laugh? Will this get the idea across? How do you get the politics and the comedy to match? And as a director, I made a decision to go, I just keep watching what's on stage and how do I keep getting that across? What's the effect of what's going on? And so it is difficult, I think, to, they say that comedy is harder to make than drama because it's so much about timing and precision and getting all those kind of elements together. And in a rehearsal room, we haven't talked about it much, but there's one of the things that we do, the set comes on and off on linear lines, that there's a track that brings the set on and a truck up the back that brings it on. So furniture comes from nowhere, it's all choreographed coming in and out, and there's music and things, but you don't have that in the rehearsal room. You have to engage your imagination in a rehearsal room like nowhere else. And then this is the time when you come to the theatre that it's the most exciting and it's the most traumatic too, I think, because you are traumatised by the choices that are in front of you and how you're going to make that happen.
Was the choice to stage the play in a certain style immediately obvious when you first read the script and approached it, or was it something that developed for you over time? I mean, one thing that struck me about the style and presentation was that even though we've got this kind of high comedy, I suppose you would call it, there are these moments of stark relief where, as an audience member, you're suddenly struck with seeing a character, someone who you're getting to know, in that moment of having to make a choice. And they're big choices. So in actual fact, for most of the characters throughout the play, the stakes are really, really quite high, aren't they? And that, for me, really underscored that human element, the heart line that you were talking about before. So was the style immediately evident?
I could say no, because it's incredibly contradictory, a political kind of statement about the world and a high-level comedy. And so you suddenly go, which one will it be? And that's been, I think I can say that quite freely, that it has been a very complex rehearsal room trying to work out all that stuff. And Ben himself says, in fact, he talked about, his writing is he talks about two-dimensional writing needing three-dimensional kind of acting, and I go, how do you do that? How do you get 5 dimensions all to work at the same time? So it is a tricky thing. What's that?
3D glasses.
3D glasses is what we need. But it is an interesting world, and we're on the cusp of a change at the moment as we come into the theatre, that these challenges are being thrown up to us, and you go, what have we done for the last couple of weeks? Do we need to shift or change, and how can we shift or change, and what do I need to... there's even moments I was writing notes in this last run saying, look, maybe we take that out now and we don't do that, or some of the things that we've been trying out, we now look at and go, it's all got to go. And so I think all 3 previews, I use previews as a very much a working time, so that we test it out on the audience. And in fact, Ben was saying, he called it Dame Audience. The Dame Audience will teach us how that happens. And I thought it was a great comment, because you will teach us what's funny or not, or what's working or what's landing or what needs to shift. And so during previews, we've got Saturday night, Monday and Tuesday night to listen to audiences and see how they respond to the work. And I change things accordingly. I've got a history of, after a second preview, this was on a musical, wrote a totally new song. I flew to Brisbane, wrote a new song with the writer, the composer, flew back in, taught the actor, and put that song into the show that night. Because sometimes that's what's needed. When you know exactly what needs to change, you just go ahead and you do it. So that's a big thing.
Certainly, and especially when you consider there are only 3 performances, 3 preview audiences that we get to get that feedback and make those changes. A lot of other new work that's produced around the world gets a week of previews, and even more, yeah, that's right, and say like a West End show, Gasping, when that opened in the West End, would have had an out-of-town tryout, in Guildford or somewhere like that, an entire season of preview audiences. So we do work very quickly and intensely in theatre here in Australia. Are there any further questions? Yes?
Would that mean that after the previews, once it starts its opening night and others, there will be no changes in the show?
So the question was, does that mean that after the previews, after opening night, are there no changes?
I'll speak to that a little bit.
Prompted a reaction in our cast.
Well, the nature of theatre is that it's a moment in time that is going to be slightly different the night before than it is, every night is slightly different. So, but just by virtue of that fact, it's changing all the time. The audience is changing. We had a different, as actors, we had a different day to the day we had yesterday or the day we're going to have tomorrow. So there are slight changes in the energy that we bring on. There's a slight change in the relationship that we have out here. We might discover things that we didn't know on opening night, and so it becomes richer, it becomes more nuanced, it becomes more subtle, it becomes finer. I'm just about to drop a name, so forgive me, but I did a comedy with Gary McDonald, and he, who's like one of our finest comic actors, but is deadly serious about the business of comedy, because it's like mathematics really in a way, comedy. It's quite scientific. And he would come in every day and he'd say to me, Cara, I've been thinking about this moment, I just think if we leave it, he'd be thinking about what worked or what didn't work, and because of the nature of this medium, we have the opportunity to kind of finesse that. So it's always going to change, but, I mean,
I was going to say, in Germany they have a tradition where the actors on the afternoon of opening night will take the director out and leave them outside the doors of the theatre as a symbolic thing, that they leave the theatre and that it's then handed over to the stage manager and the actors to run. Good luck, yeah.
That being said, the work of stage management in theatre is absolutely critical and crucial, and we all rely on that work. And the stage manager on this production is a lovely young lady, Jodie Roche, who's hiding behind the prompt side proscenium there. And the stage manager, through the rehearsal period, takes very, very detailed notes on all of the moves and all of the mechanics of the show. Here she is, round of applause. She's even keeping me on time this evening because I'm notoriously bad. And the work that stage management do really cannot be understated, because it's absolutely crucial that things happen in a certain way, notwithstanding what Caroline and Wesley were just talking about as well. Yes, you had a question?
Yeah, the lighting and projection you mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
put into a place that's sterile and futuristic, modern, identifiable. How much influence does the lighting and projection have in that?
Great question. How much influence does the lighting and projection, the AV component of the production, have over the style of the design, with respect particularly to the sterility of the environment that we alluded to before when talking about design?
Well, it does play a pretty important part in terms of, I guess, setting projection as a tool within this show is very much a scenic element in terms of telling us time, place. And because it is a comedy and the nature of the piece and how fast it moves, projection helps in that way to actually help the show not move along quickly in setting, a new location, a new time and a new place without the need for massive kind of set changes. So, yeah, it does play a big tool. There are some other forms that it does take place in terms of more of a narrative, but not to reveal too much of that. But yeah, I guess, this is the time that we kind of come together and sync those elements, projection, lighting and sound, and see what works and what doesn't, and make a lot of changes over the next few days, most definitely.
And I might as well carry on. I passed the mic down to you because I wanted you to speak first, because in a way my job always sort of comes after Craig's, because the projection, as he said, is a scenic element in this one, because when we're composing the picture, we've got the set, and then the projection becomes an image on that set, and then I'm then filling in based on the colouring of the projection, based on the intensity. In a way, I'm sort of waiting for that to develop a little before I can then finish my sort of job. But within this play, my work is a lot about the transitions and the pace. Obviously, to see the action happen as well. But this is our week to really put it all together, and I'm based on, you know, how quickly does that piece of furniture arrive? How quickly do we want to see that actor? How quickly do we want to sort of cut that scene away and see the next scene? So that's in terms of my focus, that's where I am this week.
Just thinking that in film, if you're familiar with film, a lighting designer in theatre is more like an editor. They're telling you where to look and at what pace a narrative's developing, so that the lights will go, oh, we want to show the audience this particular part for this moment. And in an editor's, you go, which part of the coverage are you going to take? Is this a close-up moment or not? And that's what I think a lighting designer in theatre does, and sets the kind of rhythm and pace for how the story gets told. Just how film can tell an audience where to look because it takes you there. I think lighting does that in theatre.
Excellent point. Thank you. Yes, we've probably got time for one or two more. Yes?
I was just wondering, like, in terms of schedule, how much bump-in do you get and how much take time and dress and spotting and that sort of stuff?
In terms of bump-in, how much lighting time, how much tech time do we get in the theatre? Jodie?
So today is day one of bump-in, so the truck arrived from Brisbane at 9:30 this morning. So for the next couple of days, we'll remain in the rehearsal room, working until the stage is ready for us. Tomorrow evening is Trent's time for a focus, which, depending on how large the lighting rig is, takes however many hours. So that's kind of Trent's time, and in that time as well, Craig needs some time to focus the projection, and our sound designer Tony Brumpton needs some time just to plot all those levels. So we try and do a lot of that work before the cast arrive on stage, just so that there's a starting point at least. We know it's going to change, but it's a starting point. So that'll be over the next couple of days, and then the cast will join us on stage on Wednesday evening. So by that point, we would have got a sense of some of the times that it'll take for certain transitions to happen. We'll get an idea of the look that Wesley and Trent are going for in terms of lighting. We'll have set some levels of sound, but then basically from that it's just work in progress. So then cast work Wednesday evening, and then Thursday afternoon, Thursday night, Friday afternoon, Friday night, Saturday afternoon, and then preview Saturday night. So it's basically, and then those morning sessions, the crew take time just to fix up things, because it'll be constantly changing over the next few days. So that's basically our schedule for this week.
And it's a really big week in theatre, and I'd like to, so you have some final words before we...
We start our working day at 9 and we finish at 11, and we do that for pretty much from Tuesday through to Saturday.
Yeah, hard work. It really is the biggest week in theatre, production week. Everyone works very hard and very long hours, as you just heard. So I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our cast and crew of GASP for having you this evening. Thank you very much. And that's all we've got time for this evening. Thank you very much for coming, and it's a pleasure to see you, and we hope to see you at the performances. Good evening.